The other significant turning point, I mean, the one that I showed you is Google. I mean, people often say, "Oh, you're in bed with the devil. You're you know, we're all in bed with the devil." I mean, there's nothing around it. I mean, I've been in bed with the devil since day one. I mean, we're born in, you know, I think we're born into a certain fallenness. But there we are. Yes, Google released its Map and Earth APIs in 2007. 6 and 7, I think, and this allowed people to build map applications on top of, you know, their essentially a kind of, you know, infrastructure that was already there, namely satellite imagery, a kind of a way of annotating and marking up time and space using a markup language that they had purchased from another company, Keyhole. So KML was coming onto its own, and this was a markup language, as you probably know, which gives every object, point, line, whatever it may be, a latitude and longitude, as well as a series of other specifications. I mean, if it's in 3D, you have many other things as well: altitude, look at, and so forth, tilt, yaw, and so forth. So you have a really robust system for marking up a 3D and 2D world. This is important because it's very different than the first version of the project, which was really kind of self-contained and somewhat non-referential. This was really, again, thinking about hypercities, city spaces, physical, they exist in particular places and particular times, and it's trying to add that extensibility, right, through the geo and the temporal. Delivery on multiple devices. This is also something that we've only seen in the past few years, where you have GPS-enabled mobile devices that you can access a database, perhaps, you know, that is, they query it based on where you happen to be and retrieve information. I want a picture of City Hall from 1963. It queries a database, returns that object. I'm making videos of my neighborhood. I want to be able to add them to a collection that I'm curating. So that's the participatory. It's the read and the write simultaneously via the mobile device. This is something that, you know, I think we could have imagined it 5 years ago. It's possible now. The other thing was there were a number of projects at UCLA that were more, I guess, you would call archaeological. They were somewhat based on, particularly in Rome, with my colleague Diane Favreau, Bernie Fisher, who used to be at UCLA and now at UVA. And they had worked very long on very high-end 3D recreations of city spaces. And they're not recreations in the sense of how it really was, but they're more what they call states of knowledge. That is, this is the state of knowledge of how we think it was. And so they recreated based on that. We had imagined that rather than this stuff existing, it's very high-end, very graphics intense, rather than existing on just a couple servers and very inaccessible to the general public, we thought, let's scale these models back a little bit. They're already geo-referenced. They have a tremendous amount of information associated with them. Let's put them in a new kind of delivery system like Google Earth or HyperCities and allow people to use these models to integrate them in their own collections and their own teaching and their own work. And let's essentially put them in something that's more open-ended and participatory and see what happens. This is also, I think, an important part of this project is, I would say that true enough, not all academic work is very, you know, put the walls around protective. It's my, you know, it's my archive, it's my project, this is what I'm doing and I'm working on it. But this project has always been about, let's open everything up as much as possible and see what happens. And it runs risks, and I'll talk about the risks in a little bit. Yeah, we had imagined this is kind of built from the ground up. So I guess to go back to one of the theoretical things is that as much as you have, and I think, you know, I'm well aware of the history of Google Earth and geospatial technologies and GPS. I think it's important to recognize, as Karen Kaplan and many others, cultural historians have articulated, its connection to military infrastructure and the creation of docile citizens and disciplinary structures and so forth. And I don't mean to dismiss that in any way. I think it's also interesting to imagine how these same technologies can be repurposed and used to do other things. That is to say, to tell stories, to isolate, not isolate, but to identify and revitalize and revive histories by finding sites of invisibility or people that have been erased or marked off the map, and beginning to annotate those stories, using the very same technologies that potentially are the same ones that are domesticating and top-down. So I had always imagined that rather than a kind of top-down model of kind of zooming in, you're actually thinking about from the ground up. And that is to say, in a given location, how do you begin to annotate all those buried stories that are going on there? And of course, it's not you, because it's not like just me, one person. It has to be a platform that allows for many different stories to coexist. Even ones that are in tension or in disagreement or at loggerheads. So that's the thinking. Let's see. Any other slide I wanted to show you? Yeah. Let's say something just briefly about that. Social technologies. This is something, again, I think in the history of digital humanities that we've only begun to just barely deal with. Because it's not because it's new, but also because it's, I think, potentially frightening. That is to say, social media or social technologies that the fungibility of information that's produced, the true information promiscuity, that is to say, information really sleeping with other information. I mean, that information is out there in many different places, doing many different things. It's used and deployed and archived in strange ways. And I would say information is it's become very promiscuous. This is exciting because you can breed you might see new connections or new ways of annotating things, but it also potentially means you have a lot of trash and other stuff to sort through. So the impact of social technologies, and here I mean not just social networking technologies, but I think technologies that enable us to create information constantly, how that's going to be archived, how it's annotated, how other people respond to it, what's kind of big question about what's worth saving and archiving and what's not. Open projects where people can post or put really anything. This is something that we struggle with in this project. So let me tell you a little, I'll show you some of the collections in HyperCities now that you know now a little bit about the theoretical background and sort of its institutional history. I guess the easy way that I had described it is this collaborative research and educational platform for traveling back in time to explore the historical layers of city spaces in an interactive hypermedia environment. That's, I think, more or less correct. It is collaborative in the sense that any institution can participate. In fact, as I was telling Rita earlier, we just have finished documenting all the source code and have just wrapped it up and are sending it off to our first group who's going to install their own version of HyperCities, create their own data, run it off their own servers, and then through our web service be able to pull data from ours as well as push data, push their own data to us. That's really exciting because it takes collaboration beyond just, hey, we're all sitting around the room, working on something together, but really we're thinking institutions that are far afield really running their own instances of the project. It does have a research and educational aspect. I think this is something that's important. I don't dissociate the two. I think it would be hard to do so. I like the idea of travel. I wrote a book on mobility on railways, and that's sort of a book on the 19th century in some ways, and maybe early 20th century. But it's not as if you kind of are resuscitating. It's not a positivistic project like, aha, we finally understand how it really was, we're done. But no, it's a platform for enabling a multiplicity of voices to talk about time-space junctures. And that's why I call it historical layers. And it goes back to, again, what I was saying, Zeitschichten. It's time layers. It's the temporal and temporal, historical, and place-based. It's interactive hypermedia, well, because it's many different media coexisting here. And that's, I think, important. Okay, so in the project, I was going to show you, this is actually Tehran. When you come to HyperCities, this is the main page here, and there's a little blog about it, and it tells you about the project and the research, and there's ways to get involved and so forth, and my little slideshow, which I just showed you, and then an ongoing blog, which features some of the projects, including this project on Tehran, which I'm going to talk about first. There's also information about our mobile media tours of LA's historic Filipino town, which I'll mention in a little while, and yeah, that's the new website. And also a project, an academic project, which I want to say something about too, because we're interested in thinking about new publication models for humanities scholarship, particularly models that are built on a platform like HyperCities and that also are, I guess, more visually intense, graphically intense, but also allow for a user to mix and match things in new ways. That's I think, a really significant part of the Web 2.0 aspect.